It all began on a rainy Thursday night in downtown Chicago. The neon lights flickered, reflecting off puddles in the empty streets, when Marcus, a 28-year-old bartender with dreams bigger than his bank account, made his usual stop at the corner ATM. His shift had been brutal, long hours, demanding patrons, and yet, somehow, he was still scraping by. Bills piled up on his kitchen counter, eviction notices threatening to upend his life, and yet, Marcus always kept a wry smile. Tonight, though, everything was about to change. As he slid his card into the machine, he noticed something odd. The screen blinked, froze for a moment, and then displayed a sequence of numbers that didn't make sense. Curiosity took over. He pressed check balance again, and again. Each time, the numbers climbed higher, higher than his wildest dreams, higher than the national lottery jackpot. At first, Marcus laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of glitch. But when he withdrew $10,000, without the machine rejecting the transaction, a chill ran down his spine. The next morning, Marcus returned to the ATM. The numbers kept growing. He didn't tell anyone, not his best friend, not his family. It felt like destiny, like some cosmic loophole had chosen him. Over the next 24 hours, he walked away from the ATM with nearly $1 million. 1 million. Overnight, Marcus went from living paycheck to paycheck to holding a fortune that could change his life forever. But with that fortune came paranoia. The city, the government, banks, they all had rules, and Marcus had broken the unwritten law of the universe. The news spread like wildfire. A mysterious figure, a lucky bartender, had amassed a fortune from thin air. Social media exploded. Headlines screamed, theories flourished, and conspiracy sites claimed it was a hacker conspiracy, a secret government experiment, or divine intervention. Marcus tried to stay under the radar, but fame, or rather, notoriety, was relentless. Lawyers called, authorities questioned, and soon, his life began to crumble. Friends he once trusted now eyed him with envy. His apartment was broken into. Bank accounts froze. Threats appeared in his mailbox, in his inbox, even on his doorstep. The money that once promised freedom now felt like chains. Marcus realized that the universe had given him a taste of fortune, but at a price he hadn't anticipated. Late one night, alone in his apartment, Marcus stared at his dwindling reflection in the mirror. He thought of all the people he had ignored, all the relationships he had jeopardized. The money that was supposed to make him happy had made him a prisoner of his own desire. The world he once knew, the carefree life of a bartender, filled with laughter and tips, with camaraderie and simple joys, was gone. Then came the whispers of the ATM glitch itself. Some claimed it wasn't a glitch at all, but a deliberate test, an experiment in human greed and morality. Others whispered darker tales of people who had tried to exploit the system, only to vanish without a trace. Marcus wondered if he had dodged fate or merely delayed it. Each dollar in his account felt like a countdown, a ticking clock that reminded him that nothing in this world comes without cost. As days turned to weeks, Marcus tried to rebuild what remained of his life. The money disappeared, siphoned by legal battles, mysterious debts, and unknown forces that seemed intent on reclaiming what wasn't theirs to give. He returned to bartending, but he was never the same. The smile he once wore now carried shadows, and every clink of glasses reminded him of the price of temptation. And yet, Marcus kept one secret. Hidden away in a drawer, untouched, was a single ATM receipt, a proof that for one brief, shining moment, he had touched the impossible. It was a reminder of both the heights of fortune and the depths of human fragility. Because sometimes, the universe doesn't reward the brave. It tests them, it tempts them, and it reminds them that some gifts are too heavy to bear. The day after Marcus withdrew his first million, he walked into the bar where he had worked for years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the familiar scent of spilled beer and lemon cleaner filling the air. His co-workers greeted him as usual, oblivious to the seismic shift in his life. But Marcus couldn't stop noticing the little things, the way the security cameras followed him a second too long, the subtle glances from strangers in the bar. That evening, a man in a tailored suit approached him at the bar. No introduction, no preamble, just a cold, calculated voice. "Marcus, you've caught attention," the man said. "People who notice these things, they don't just let it go. Marcus laughed nervously. I don't know what you mean. The man leaned in closer, his breath carrying the faint scent of cigar smoke. You know exactly what I mean. That money you've withdrawn, it's not yours. And now, everyone wants it back. Panic clawed at Marcus. He felt the walls closing in. But before he could respond, the man was gone, slipping out as silently as he had arrived. It was the first of many encounters. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. His phone rang constantly, but when he answered, there was only static. Shadowy figures loitered near the ATM, as if waiting for him. Emails arrived from anonymous accounts, warning him to return the money or face consequences. Marcus realized that the glitch had been a trap. The universe, or whoever controlled it, was testing him, and failure wasn't an option. The temptation to spend was overwhelming. At first, he splurged: luxury cars, penthouse apartments, designer clothes. For a brief, euphoric moment, it felt like a dream come true. But the bliss was short-lived. Every purchase brought new stress: stolen packages, credit freezes, suspicious audits. It became clear, wealth had transformed him from bartender to target. One night, Marcus decided to investigate the ATM itself. He returned to the corner where it all began. The machine looked ordinary, yet somehow alive. Its screen flickered, almost inviting him to approach. He inserted his card. The machine hummed. Numbers scrolled across the screen faster than he could read. Suddenly, a text appeared, not on his phone, but on the ATM itself. You've seen what you shouldn't. Now choose, continue, or lose everything. Marcus froze. The choice was clear, or at least it should have been. He thought of his life before the money, the struggles, the friends, the late nights wiping down bar counters. That version of him had been simple, happy even. This new life, it was a gilded cage. He backed away, but it was too late. The world had already noticed. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Online forums exploded with speculation. People speculated that Marcus was part of an underground experiment, that the ATM was a government test, that aliens were involved. Conspiracy theories multiplied like wildfire. Marcus tried to disappear, but the world doesn't forget overnight. Private investigators, bounty hunters, and opportunists all descended on him. He changed apartments, cities, even his appearance, but the shadows followed. Every time he withdrew money, even a small sum, it felt like a countdown ticking closer to disaster. Eventually, Marcus realized something terrifying. The money was not a gift. It was a test of his morality, his restraint, his sanity. And like all tests, it had consequences. People who had attempted to cheat the system before him, none had returned. He made a decision that night, standing alone in his darkened apartment, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. He would stop. He would return what wasn't his. And maybe, just maybe, he could reclaim some fragment of the life he had lost. Marcus returned to the bar, not as a millionaire, but as a man reborn. He poured drinks, laughed with regulars, and for the first time in weeks, felt peace. The money was gone. The temptation vanished, but the lesson remained etched into his soul. Some miracles are not blessings, they are warnings. And somewhere, out there, the ATM waits. Patient, silent, watching, ready for the next soul who dares to dream too big, too fast. Rain poured down the empty streets of Chicago, neon lights reflecting off puddles as Marcus, exhausted from his shift, walked toward the corner ATM. He slid his card in, the screen flickering before freezing and displaying numbers that made no sense. He stared, disbelief and curiosity battling inside him. Hesitantly, he pressed check balance again. The numbers climbed higher than any paycheck he had ever seen. Heart pounding, he withdrew $10,000. The machine accepted it without hesitation. He stumbled back, gripping the cash, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. For a moment, it felt unreal, almost like a dream. By morning, he returned. Repeated withdrawals brought him nearly $1 million in 24 hours. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, stacks of cash surrounding him, staring at the impossible numbers on the receipts. News alerts popped up across social media, whispers of a mysterious bartender turned millionaire spreading like wildfire. Shadows in the corners of his apartment seemed to move closer. Strangers stared just a little too long, and an uneasy feeling crept in. Every step outside made him feel watched. Every glance behind him made his heart race. At the bar, A man in a tailored suit appeared, approaching silently. "Marcus," he said, voice low and cold, "that money isn't yours. And now, everyone wants it back." Marcus tried to laugh it off, but the warning clung to him, heavy and undeniable. From that moment, paranoia followed him. Packages disappeared from his apartment, accounts were frozen, and threatening emails arrived without origin. Every attempt to enjoy the wealth led to chaos, vandalized cars, broken windows, the constant feeling that someone was always one step ahead. The fortune that had promised freedom now felt like a cage. One night, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread, Marcus returned to the original ATM. Its screen flickered as if alive. A message appeared. "You've seen what you shouldn't. Choose, continue, or lose everything." He froze. The choice wasn't tempting anymore. It was terrifying. The money had never been a gift. It was a test, one that could consume him entirely. He stepped back, heart racing, realizing he could no longer risk another withdrawal. The media frenzy exploded. News outlets, forums, and social media debated the mystery of the ATM millionaire. Marcus moved constantly, changing apartments and cities, hiding his identity as whispers of his story grew louder. Even in fleeting moments of solitude, he felt pursued. The shadow of the money and its unseen owners loomed over him constantly. The life he had wanted, the one with limitless wealth, was now a prison. Alone in his apartment one night, he stared at his reflection, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. He thought of the simple life he had before, of long shifts, cheap drinks, laughter with friends, and the peace he had once known. The decision crystallized in his mind. He would stop. He would give back what wasn't his and reclaim the life he had lost. Wealth was seductive, but its price was too high. Weeks later, Marcus returned to bartending. The bar smelled of lemon cleaner and spilled beer, but it felt like home. He laughed with coworkers, poured drinks, and felt a sense of normalcy he hadn't known in months. In a drawer, he kept a single ATM receipt untouched, a reminder of the impossible fortune he had touched, survived, and ultimately relinquished. He knew that some gifts were not blessings but warnings, lessons in restraint and humility. And somewhere, in the rain-slicked streets, the ATM waited. Silent, humming faintly, patient, ready for the next soul willing to tempt fate. Marcus had survived, but the memory lingered, a reminder that the universe never forgets, and that fortune without caution comes at a cost that can never be measured. Marcus walked home through the damp streets, the neon lights reflecting off the puddles like shards of broken glass. Every step felt heavier than the last. The memory of the man in the suit haunted him, his warning echoing in Marcus' mind. Everyone wants it back. He felt eyes on him, shadows moving where no one should be. Even the city itself seemed to whisper his name, warning him that the money had marked him. At his apartment, he checked his phone. Notifications exploded with messages from strangers claiming to know about the ATM, about him, about the fortune he had taken. Some were curious, some threatening, some outright sinister. His once simple life had been replaced by fear and uncertainty. Marcus tried to sleep, but dreams of faceless figures taking the cash swirled in his mind. Each time he woke, he found new signs that someone had been in his apartment. A window slightly ajar, a package moved, a note he hadn't left. He realized that he couldn't trust anyone, not his friends, not his family. Even the law seemed uncertain, as if the world itself was conspiring against him. The fortune had given him everything, but it had also stripped him of safety, peace, and solitude. Marcus began to see the pattern. Every dollar he touched seemed to demand a sacrifice, an invisible cost that mounted with each withdrawal. One night, unable to resist the pull of the ATM, he returned. Rain lashed at his face, and the street was empty. He approached the machine cautiously. The screen flickered again, numbers scrolling faster than he could comprehend. And then, as if sensing his hesitation, the message appeared. This is your final choice. Keep what you have and be destroyed, or walk away and survive. Marcus froze, heart hammering. He stared at the machine, then at the piles of money in his apartment. He thought of the freedom he had once craved, the simple nights at the bar filled with laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of a life earned honestly. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his card. Not to take more, but to leave it there, untouched, and walk away. In the following days, the media frenzy subsided. Social media moved on to the next viral story. Marcus returned to bartending, pouring drinks with a cautious smile. He no longer envied wealth. He understood its weight. The receipt from that night at the ATM remained in his drawer, a silent reminder that some doors, once opened, cannot be forgotten even if they are closed. Yet, deep in the city, the ATM waited. Silent, patient, watching. Another soul would eventually approach it, tempted by the impossible numbers on the screen. Marcus knew he had survived, but he also knew that some tests never truly end. They simply wait for the next dreamer, the next desperate heart, to stumble into the trap. And as he poured a drink for a regular, Marcus whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, "Some fortunes are too heavy to bear. Some gifts are warnings. And the world, it always collects its price." Rain continued to fall, the streets glistening like glass. Somewhere out there, the ATM hummed quietly, waiting for its next visitor. Marcus walked past it one last time, head held low, heart steady, finally understanding that true wealth was not in numbers on a screen, but in surviving the test and keeping one's soul intact. Rain fell relentlessly over Chicago, a constant drum against the asphalt and the neon signs that flickered in the darkness. Marcus walked through the streets, each step heavier than the last. The city was alive, yet cold and indifferent. Every corner seemed to harbor a shadow. Every alley whispered secrets, and every street lamp flickered like a warning. Marcus had once thought of himself as just another bartender scraping by, but now he felt like prey, hunted by a fortune that had arrived too quickly and a world that seemed ready to reclaim it. Even at his apartment, the sense of unease never lifted. He paced from window to window, glancing out at the streets below, noticing movement where there should have been none. At first, he thought it was paranoia, but the signs were undeniable. Footprints near his door that weren't his, shadows lingering too long outside his windows, the faint hum of someone or something observing him. His phone buzzed incessantly, notifications filling with strange messages, some threatening, some cryptic, some just warnings that made his heart race. Marcus tried to ignore them, telling himself that the money had been a gift, a lucky accident, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. The first time he realized that he couldn't control it anymore was when the man in the suit appeared at the bar. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask questions. He simply stated, "Marcus, that money isn't yours. And now, everyone wants it back." Marcus had laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it, but something in the man's eyes, cold, precise, knowing, sent a shiver down his spine. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw shadows reaching for him, heard whispers in the dark, and felt the weight of the money pressing down on his chest. The fortune had initially felt like freedom. With every withdrawal from the ATM, he imagined a life without limits. He dreamed of expensive cars, luxury apartments, vacations in far-off places. For a brief, intoxicating moment, he believed that the universe had finally smiled upon him. But as quickly as the money arrived, the consequences followed. Packages disappeared from his doorstep, his apartment was broken into, and his bank accounts were frozen by mysterious forces he could not comprehend. Even simple attempts to enjoy his wealth, ordering food, paying for a night at a hotel, felt like walking on thin ice. The world was closing in, and Marcus realized that the fortune he had gained was not a gift but a burden. Days blurred into nights. Marcus moved constantly, changing apartments, cities, and identities, hoping to outrun the invisible force that had claimed his life. But the world was relentless. No matter where he went, the shadow of the ATM, of the money, followed him. Every time he saw an unfamiliar face, his heart raced. Every unexpected sound made him jump. Even the smallest misstep, an unlocked door, a lingering glance, a misplaced note, felt like it could expose him to a danger he didn't fully understand. He returned to the ATM several times, driven by curiosity, fear, and something deeper, a compulsion he could not name. The machine was always there, humming faintly, numbers scrolling impossibly high. One night, as rain pelted down, the screen flickered and displayed a message that seemed to speak directly to him. "You've seen what you shouldn't. Choose, continue, or lose everything." Marcus froze. The choice was not tempting anymore. It was terrifying. He realized that the ATM was not just a machine. It was a test, a trap, and he was the prey. He thought back to the man in the suit, the warnings, the shadows, and the chaos that had followed every withdrawal. The money had never been a gift. It was a lure, a trap set by forces he could not see, and every attempt to hold on to it had only drawn him further into danger. Marcus understood, finally, that the only way to survive was to walk away. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his card, leaving the money untouched, and stepped back. His heart pounded, his palms were sweaty, but a strange sense of relief washed over him. He had survived the first test. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. News outlets speculated about the mysterious ATM millionaire, conspiracy theorists claimed government experiments, and social media exploded with theories about Marcus, the bartender who had touched the impossible. He moved constantly, hiding his identity, trying to disappear into the crowd, but the story was everywhere. Everyone knew, everyone speculated, and no one left him alone. Friends he had once trusted now looked at him with envy. Strangers approached him with curiosity or suspicion, and every interaction carried the weight of the fortune he had once held. Alone in his apartment one night, Marcus stared at his reflection. He thought of his life before the money, long shifts behind the bar, cheap drinks, laughter with friends, quiet satisfaction in simple victories. That life had been hard, yes, but it had been his own. The fortune had given him everything he thought he wanted, but it had also taken away the one thing he truly needed: peace. He realized that wealth, without control, without understanding, without limits, was a chain, not a blessing. Weeks passed. Marcus returned to bartending, pouring drinks, laughing with coworkers, and slowly rebuilding the life he had lost. He avoided the ATM, avoided the streets where he had once felt the pull of temptation, and avoided thinking about the fortune that had nearly destroyed him. The receipt from that first night at the ATM remained in a drawer, untouched, a silent reminder of the impossible and the dangerous. But the world never forgets. Marcus knew that the ATM still existed, humming quietly in the rain, waiting for the next person desperate enough, foolish enough, or greedy enough to approach it. He had survived, but survival had changed him. The shadows of the fortune lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that some gifts are not blessings but warnings. That the universe tests those who dream too big, too fast. One evening, as he cleaned glasses behind the bar, he saw a young man enter, eyes wide, hopeful, and unaware of the dangers that awaited him. Marcus felt a pang of recognition and fear. He remembered the thrill of holding impossible sums of money in his hands, the intoxicating freedom it promised, and the terror that followed. He whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, "Some fortunes are too heavy to bear. Some gifts are warnings. And the world, it always collects its price." Rain continued to fall outside, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected neon and shadow. Somewhere out there, the ATM waited, patient, silent, ready for its next visitor. Marcus finished his shift, stepped out into the wet streets, and walked past it without looking. He had survived the temptation, reclaimed his life, and finally understood that true wealth was not in numbers on a screen, but in the freedom to live another day. The city carried on, indifferent and unyielding. The lights flickered, cars passed, and the night hummed with life. Marcus felt the weight of the past months lift slightly, though he knew the memory would never leave him. He had glimpsed the impossible, touched it, and survived. And that survival, he realized, was worth more than any fortune. He walked home, the rain soaking through his clothes, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a quiet peace. No one followed him, no shadows lingered too long, no messages waited in his inbox. He was alone, but not lonely. The world had tested him, and he had endured. The money was gone, the temptation had passed, and Marcus had reclaimed the life he had once known. Yet, in the back of his mind, he knew the truth. The ATM waited. The test would continue, for someone else, somewhere else. And Marcus, wiser and scarred by the experience, would carry the memory of that night forever. The night when fortune came crashing into his life, offering impossible wealth and demanding a price he almost could not pay. He unlocked his apartment door, stepped inside, and sat in silence. The room was quiet, The city sounds distant. He looked at the single receipt from the ATM, still pristine, still untouched. It was more than paper. It was proof that he had survived the impossible. Proof that he had resisted temptation when the world itself seemed to conspire against him. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The city shimmered with light and shadow, indifferent to human dreams, indifferent to human greed. The ATM hummed faintly somewhere in the darkness, patient, waiting for the next person willing to reach for the impossible. Marcus sat back, exhaling slowly, understanding fully now what he had learned. That fortune is not measured in money, but in the strength to walk away, in the courage to survive, and in the wisdom to know that some gifts are far too heavy to bear. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus' life slowly returned to normal. He still bartended, still poured drinks, still joked with customers, but he was changed. He no longer envied wealth, no longer chased dreams of fortune. He had seen the price of the impossible and had survived. That survival had become his real wealth, a currency no one could take from him. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, the ATM waited, humming faintly, holding its secrets and its warnings for the next soul who dared to dream too big. Marcus knew he would never go near it again. He would never forget it. And he would carry the lesson for the rest of his life. That some gifts are not blessings, they are tests, and the universe always collects its price. The days stretched on like a slow, unrelenting current, each one a reminder of how close Marcus had come to losing everything. He had returned to his life at the bar, pouring drinks and making small talk with patrons who could never have imagined the storm he had weathered. But even in this return to normalcy, the shadow of the ATM loomed in the back of his mind. Each sound in the night, the scraping of a trash can, the rumble of a distant train, the creak of a floorboard, set his nerves on edge. He had survived, yes, but survival had a way of leaving invisible scars. Marcus began keeping a journal, writing down every detail of his experience. The dates, the withdrawals, the messages, the encounters with strangers, and the man in the suit. He wrote about the nights of paranoia, the sleepless hours, the frantic pacing through rain-soaked streets. Each word felt like a small release, a way to process the terror he had endured. Yet, the deeper he wrote, the more he realized that the story he carried was not just about him. It was a warning. He started noticing patterns in his dreams. Faces of strangers appeared again and again, eyes dark and unyielding, always watching, always judging. The ATM was there too, humming and glowing with impossible numbers, offering the same choice over and over. Take the money or leave it and survive. Each dream left him drenched in sweat, heart racing, and gasping for breath. Marcus understood that the experience had seeped into his very mind, embedding itself in a way that no physical distance could erase. Occasionally, he would venture outside at night, taking long walks through the quiet streets, hoping that distance from the ATM would ease his anxiety. But no matter how far he went, his mind replayed the events. He saw the neon reflections of the streets not as beautiful lights, but as signals, coded messages from a world he didn't understand. Every time a car passed too slowly or a stranger's gaze lingered, he felt the presence of unseen observers. The paranoia was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew with every passing day. He began to study human behavior more intensely. At the bar, he watched patrons and tried to understand what drove them, their desires, their fears, their greed. He realized that the ATM had been more than a machine. It had been a mirror, reflecting not just his desires but the darker impulses that humans carry. The money had tested him in ways that no ordinary experience could, and now, he saw it everywhere, in everyone. The world was full of temptations, and the cost of indulgence was rarely visible until it was too late. Marcus also tried to rebuild relationships that had frayed during his ordeal. Friends who had once been close now treated him cautiously, some with envy, some with fear. He had avoided family, fearing that their involvement would draw them into the same danger. Slowly, he reconnected, sharing small parts of his story without revealing the full truth. He could see the disbelief in their eyes, and in a way, that disbelief was a blessing. The less people knew, the less danger there was of the shadow reaching them. Months passed, and life regained a sense of rhythm, though it was never the same. Marcus no longer chased wealth or dreamed of impossible fortunes. He found solace in routine, the rhythm of the bar, the predictable flow of customers, the small victories of daily life. Yet, he could not shake the feeling that the ATM's test was still out there, waiting for the next person, always patient, always silent. The knowledge that the machine existed somewhere in the city, humming quietly, was a permanent scar on his psyche. One evening, as he closed the bar and stepped into the cold night, Marcus saw a young man standing at the corner, staring at a brightly lit ATM. The man's eyes were wide with curiosity, desperation, and greed, not knowing the danger that awaited him. Marcus froze, his heart hammering, memories of his own experience flooding back. He knew what the machine offered, and he understood what it demanded in return. Without hesitation, he turned and walked the other way, leaving the young man to his fate, a silent guardian of the lesson he had learned the hard way. At home, Marcus sat in his chair, looking at the single ATM receipt he had kept all these months. It was more than paper. It was proof, a talisman of survival and wisdom. He traced the numbers with his finger, remembering the fear, the temptation, and the choice he had made. It reminded him that some opportunities are traps in disguise, some gifts come with invisible chains, and some tests are designed not for gain, but for endurance. The nights remained quiet, but Marcus was never truly alone. The memory of the ATM, the shadow of the fortune, lingered in every reflection, every flicker of light, and every whisper of wind through the city streets. He had survived, and in that survival, he found strength, patience, and perspective. He understood now that life was not measured by what one could take, but by what one could withstand. Even as months turned to years, Marcus never approached another ATM like that corner machine again. He kept his life simple, his routines steady, his interactions cautious. Yet, he remained vigilant, aware that the world has a way of testing those who dream too large or too fast. The ATM, the numbers, the warnings, they were all part of a larger lesson, one that transcended money, fear, and greed. And somewhere, in the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, the ATM waited. It hummed faintly, glowing softly in the dark, patient, eternal, waiting for the next person who thought themselves clever enough to outsmart the world, ignorant of the cost that would follow. Marcus understood the truth. The machine was not evil, nor benevolent. It was impartial, a mirror reflecting human desire and testing the limits of the human heart. Marcus lived out his life quietly, but he was never naive. Every decision, every temptation, every fleeting desire was measured against the lesson he had learned. He became careful, observant, and thoughtful, understanding that the greatest wealth a person could possess was not money, but wisdom and restraint. He shared fragments of his experience with those he trusted, always framing it as a cautionary tale, a story of endurance and survival rather than fortune. As years passed, the city changed, the streets evolved, and new faces appeared, unaware of the silent machine waiting in the shadows. Marcus often walked past that corner, older now, the lines of stress and experience etched into his face. He would glance at the ATM from a distance, remembering the terror, the temptation, and the choice that had saved him. And he would whisper quietly to himself, "Some fortunes are too heavy to bear. Some gifts are warnings. The universe always collects its price, and wisdom is the only wealth worth keeping." Even in quiet moments, sitting alone with a drink in hand, Marcus could feel the pull of the memory. He never returned to the machine, never sought out impossible numbers again, but he knew that it existed somewhere, ready to test the next dreamer. And he accepted it, understanding that his role was not to take, but to survive, to endure, to remember. Survival had become his currency, and in that currency, he found freedom. Marcus understood that life would continue to test him in subtle ways, though nothing would ever compare to the trial of the ATM. Every encounter, every decision, every temptation would carry echoes of that night, that week, that period when he held a fortune in his hands and the world demanded everything in return. But he had endured. He had survived. And in surviving, he had discovered the rarest wealth of all, the knowledge that some treasures are not meant to be held, and some victories are measured not in acquisition, but in restraint. The rain continued to fall on Chicago, washing over the streets, pooling in the gutters, reflecting the neon lights that shimmered like illusions. Somewhere, the ATM hummed quietly, patient and eternal. Marcus walked past it one last time, a silhouette moving through the night, carrying with him the wisdom and scars of a man who had touched the impossible and survived. He knew the lesson would stay with him forever. That fortune comes with a price, temptation is a test, and survival is the true measure of wealth. And in the quiet of the night, with the rain falling and the city alive yet indifferent, Marcus smiled faintly, at peace with himself for the first time in years. He had faced the impossible, resisted its lure, and walked away. The ATM waited, patient and eternal, for the next soul ready to be tested, but Marcus would never be that soul again. Marcus woke to the soft gray light of dawn filtering through his apartment window, the rain from the previous night reduced to a quiet drizzle. For the first time in months, the city felt ordinary, almost comforting. The chaos, the fear, the relentless tension that had plagued him since the night of the ATM glitch seemed to recede, leaving only clarity. He sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the single receipt he had kept hidden all this time. Its numbers, once intoxicating and terrifying, now seemed almost mundane, symbols of a trial he had endured and overcome. He reflected on the choices he had made, on the moments when temptation had threatened to swallow him, on the nights of sleepless panic and paranoia. Each memory was sharp and vivid, but they no longer held the same power over him. Marcus had survived not by greed, not by cunning, but by restraint, by walking away when the world demanded too much, by understanding that some rewards are traps, and some opportunities are meant only to teach. Returning to the bar that evening felt like stepping into a sanctuary. The familiar rhythm, the friendly banter, the clink of glasses and laughter, it all grounded him. He moved behind the counter with calm, pouring drinks for regulars, exchanging jokes, and listening to stories. He realized that the ordinary life he had once dismissed as mundane was, in fact, precious. Safety, friendship, and the quiet satisfaction of work done well were forms of wealth far more valuable than any sum of money. Marcus often caught himself glancing at the corner where the ATM had waited, humming silently in the dark. He did not go near it, nor did he ever plan to. He had learned the hard way that some tests are not meant to be passed by taking, but by choosing not to take. The world would continue to test others, and the machine would wait, patient and impartial, for the next soul desperate or reckless enough to approach it. He could not intervene, but he carried a quiet understanding of its power, a knowledge that separated him from those who might fall prey to it. He spent evenings walking through the city streets after closing the bar, not out of fear, but out of a desire to observe, to feel alive in a world that had once seemed indifferent. The neon reflections in puddles no longer whispered threats, and the shadows no longer seemed to follow him. Instead, they reminded him of the choices he had made, of the resilience he had discovered within himself. He felt gratitude for the ordinary, for the small victories of everyday life, and for the wisdom that the impossible had imparted. Marcus knew he would never forget that period, the terror, the temptation, the impossible numbers on the screen of that corner ATM. But he also knew that he had emerged stronger, tempered by experience, and capable of enduring what many others could not. The money, the media frenzy, the paranoia, all of it had been a crucible, and he had survived. And survival, he realized, was more valuable than any fortune. In the quiet of his apartment one night, he finally allowed himself to feel peace. The rain tapped softly against the window pane, the city hummed outside, and for the first time, Marcus felt free. He had faced the impossible, resisted its lure, and reclaimed his life. The lesson remained etched in his mind. Some gifts are not blessings but warnings, some opportunities are tests of character, and true wealth lies in the strength to walk away. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking at the receipt one last time. He smiled faintly, a soft, private acknowledgement of what he had endured. He placed it back in the drawer, untouched, and let the drawer close gently. Outside, the streets of Chicago continued their ceaseless rhythm, unaware of the drama that had once unfolded in a small corner of the city. The ATM waited, patient and silent, for the next person ready to be tested, but Marcus knew that he would never be that person again. He rose from his chair, stretched, and stepped into the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights. He walked without hurry, without fear, fully present in each step. The terror, the temptation, and the chaos of those months were now memories, powerful teachers that had reshaped him. Marcus had learned that some trials cannot be measured in money or success, that some victories are silent, and that endurance and wisdom are the greatest riches a person can possess. And as he disappeared into the streets, blending with the hum of the city, Marcus carried with him the quiet knowledge that he had survived the impossible, that he had faced temptation and chosen wisely, and that the true wealth of life lay not in fortune, but in the courage to endure, the restraint to resist, and the freedom to live on, unbroken. The ATM remained in its corner, humming faintly, patient, eternal, waiting for the next soul to stumble upon it. Marcus walked on, finally free, the weight lifted from his shoulders, and the world stretching endlessly ahead, full of ordinary beauty and quiet possibility. He had survived, and that survival was enough.